Welcome back to the Better Bid Calling Podcast. I am Joshua Houston, joined today with a man who needs no introduction, but it's my honor to give him an introduction anyways. John Kessler is joining us today. He is the 1987 World Tobacco Auctioneer Champion, something that we do not hear a lot about in these days anymore. And that's an unfortunate thing. There's such a rich history there with the tobacco industry in America. We'll talk more about that later. But John, it's good to see you. Good to have you. Good to talk to you again. It's been a little bit since we've chatted, but I'm happy to see you.
I'm glad to be here. It's certainly an honor and a pleasure for me to be with you today.
Well, John, why don't you give us a rundown of who you are, what you do currently, and what life is like for John Kessler today?
Well, John Kessler, I'm 62 years old. I grew up around auctions. I'm a third-generation auctioneer. My grandfather was an auctioneer back in the 1930s and 40s because of the fact that he had a deep, strong voice. And people would, when they needed to sell some assets, they would call him to come conduct their auctions for them. My grandfather had to quit auctioneering in 1940 when he was about 40 years old because of having his first heart attack. And my father started in the auction business in 1938. He picked up the auctioneer's check by selling the cows whenever he was feeding them out at the farm. And I grew up around it, going to auctions all my life. I hung around on the coattails of my father, and I picked up that. I've never been to auction school. Sold a little bit of everything. I own Kessler Auction Realty Company, which is the firm that my father started in 1938. In essence, the name has changed a couple of times through the years. And we sell real estate, farm equipment, both farms and homes, farm equipment, personal property, estates, business liquidations. Used to sell a lot of dairy sales. We don't anymore because there's no dairies in this area. I've sold a livestock market, and I sold tobacco. And so I've done a little bit of everything. I'm married. My wife and I, we have two children, John Wayne, who is a business partner of mine, and my daughter, Marcia, who is she also is an apprentice auctioneer, but she's a certified real estate appraiser, and that's what she does. And I've got 4 grandchildren that I'm very proud of. And if you don't believe me, just ask me and I'll tell you about them.
Yeah, well, that's great. So, John, you said that you did not go to auction school. Tell us a little bit about your educational background and learning this industry. Did you go to any kind of school for anything at all? And what was it that kind of taught you the industry? I know obviously growing up with family that was in it, but tell us a little bit about that.
Basically growing up around it. And, here, this is an interesting fact. That's what this program is supposed to be, is something that's interesting. I won my first auctioneers contest when I was 3 years old. And my dad and mother and myself, we traveled to the National Auctioneers Convention. This would have been about 1966 or 67. The National Auctioneers Convention was in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And we traveled to the National Auctioneers Convention. And my dad entered me in an amateur auctioneers contest at the National Auctioneers Convention. And I won first prize. I won $10. And I wouldn't leave the stage until they gave me my money. My dad said that he trained me right. Always get paid whenever I got done. So, just being around it, I used to listen to my dad. I had tapes of him selling livestock at livestock markets. I had tapes of him selling tobacco. I went to auctions every weekend that he was doing, whether it was farms or personal property or whatever. And I picked up the chain, and I would just take my tape recorder, and I'd go back in my bedroom, even as a little kid, and I'd shut the door, and I'd sell the cows or my toy tractors or something else. And I continued to work on that. And so when I got into high school, my ag teacher wanted me to be in the FFA auctioneering contest that they was going to have at one of the field days coming up. And I really didn't want to, but they kind of talked me into it. So we rode 2 hours to get there on a school bus, got there, and they had canceled that contest. They wasn't going to have that. And so he entered me in something else, which was ag sales and service. And I gave a demonstration on different types of auctions, and I won that contest. And I won it the next 4 years, the 4 years that I was in high school. won FFA tobacco auctioneering contest whenever I was in high school. And so it was just something that I continued to develop and go into sales with my dad. And I just picked it up. And, I've listened to tapes of different auctioneers around the country that, my dad knew and associated with. I went to National Auctioneers conventions as a kid up until about 1970. 8 or 9, I had been to every convention, National Auctioneers convention that there had been up in that point since I'd been born, and just different auctioneers. And I picked it up that way, and I just continued to work on my chain.
Yeah, great. Well, I mean, that's what it takes. It's auction school, I think, is so beneficial because it teaches you law, it teaches you business ethics, really how to run a business. But at auction school, you work with people on their chant. I mean, I go to Nashville Auction School and help people work on their chant for about 3 hours during that school. And the problem is, people think when you get done with auction school that you have everything together for getting started in public bid calling. And I think it gives you a good foundation, but you have got to work at it. It is constant. I mean,
Right.
I've been a professional
Right.
bid caller for the past 10 years or longer, 12 years now, and I still work on my chant every day. And I think that's true probably of everybody who's behind a microphone.
It does. And I'm a better auctioneer now than I was when I was 24 years old when I won the World Tobacco Auctioneering Championship. And I've changed some things in my chain. You know, bid calling, I'm very passionate about bid calling. And one of the things that my father always told me was clarity, I think, is the number one thing. It doesn't make any difference how many filler words you have and how fast that you can talk, but clarity is the number one thing. And that's what so many young auctioneers do not have is the clarity. And so I really emphasize that. I encourage my son. My son's an auctioneer, and I encouraged him to go to auction school. He did not. And he has made a heck of an auctioneer. And his case is somewhat like mine. He's grown up around it and he's learned things there. I got really frustrated, and I passed my auctioneer's exam. I graduated from high school in May of 1980. I had to wait until I was 18 to be able to take my apprentice auctioneer's exam. So I had to wait till November of that year before I could do that. The board actually called me. I took the exam like on a Tuesday. They called me on Thursday and told me that I had passed. I did not have my license in the mail yet, but I could start on the tobacco market on Monday. And I followed my dad on the tobacco market, and I picked up things from him that I was doing that. On Saturdays, the livestock market that he sold and then I later sold was on Saturday afternoons. And I went every Saturday and I sat in that sale box and I saw what was going on and I saw what he did and I saw where he was breaking his increments at. And, you make mental notes of things and you learn. And immediately he put me in. First thing I sold in the livestock market was baby calves. And I'd sell those and, I'd work 40 minutes. We'd have a sale out here in the country somewhere or another. We had another experienced auctioneer that worked for us. My dad would sell an hour. He'd put the other man on. He'd sell about an hour, and I'd get about 15 minutes of selling time. And I was really, really aggravated about that. I didn't think that my dad was being fair with me. And I asked him about it one day, just point blank. And I said, I don't think that you're being fair with me in time. Every auctioneer, and I see that more now, every auctioneer wants to be on the microphone. Everybody wants to be on the microphone, but you learn so much when you're not on the microphone too. And he said, you're not ready. And he said, when you're ready, I'll turn you loose. He said, I don't want you in a position where you're going to bust a gut. That was his expression, bust a gut and ruin your voice. And my dad could sell from 10 o'clock on Saturday morning on a farm sale and go straight to the Taylor County stockyards and get behind the microphone there and roll out of that box at 11 o'clock at night. Never had nothing to eat, maybe one bathroom break in between somewhere or another. And his voice was as strong Saturday night when he came home as it was Saturday morning whenever he left. And so I continued on. And one Saturday, I'm selling them little baby calves. We sold baby calves. And the next thing was some Holstein heifers. And then we sold some lightweight weigh calves. And we continued on till we got to head calves. I've been selling about 2 hours, and then nobody come around there to catch me. And so when they finally did, and I went back around there, I told Dad, I said, I didn't think anybody was fixing to come. He said, you've been wanting more time. He said, you're ready. He said, you got all the time you want now. And, and so that's where I progressed from. So.
Yeah.
And you
Yeah.
got to remember, we was talking about learning. My parents were 44 years old when I was born. So I'm the prodigy of older parents. My dad was 60 something years old whenever I graduated from high school, 61 or 2 whenever I graduated from high school, my age. And so he was thinking about retirement until one day we were riding down the road and he said, "What do you want to do when you get out of school?" And I said, "I want to be an auctioneer like you, Dad." And that's when he started turning some things, making some things happen here within our business that opened some doors for me. So I had an advantage that a lot of people don't have.
Yeah, well, that's great. That's a great story. I think a lot of people get into bid calling, especially, and I'll say the auction industry as a whole, because of family, especially dads or moms who were bid callers and in it. So that's a great thing. Now, John, have you always lived in Kentucky?
I have. I have. I live on the same farm that my grandfather bought in 1923. I own that farm, and so I live within probably 100 feet of where I grew up at. My brother owns that house where I grew up at now, but I live within 100 feet of where I grew up at. So I've always been here. My roots is here. This is home. This is what I love. So
Great, great. Well, the Kentucky Auctioneers Association is a phenomenal association. I really enjoyed my time getting to be with y'all a couple years ago. In fact, our listeners will know that's really what prompted this podcast was the contest that I was able to judge there. Now, you've been involved in the Kentucky Auctioneers Association, and of course, John Wayne is heavily involved in it, and he might have even served or is serving as president. I'm not entirely sure, but I will talk more about John Wayne here in just a minute, I promise. But tell us a little bit about the Kentucky Auctioneers Association and for our listeners in Kentucky, what they can expect from that association.
well, the Kentucky Auctioneer Association, of course, made up professional auctioneers, and actually our convention starts tomorrow. So I'll be
Right.
traveling tomorrow along with my family. We'll be going to Lexington for the convention this year. Kentucky Auctioneer Association, my father was one of the charter members and one of the founding members of the Kentucky Auctioneer Association. There was a handful of people that met in the Brown Hotel in Louisville and started that organization as a way to be together. As a result of that, a lot of those auctioneers worked on what is now the Kentucky Auctioneers License Law and developed that. And if you go back and look at the original Kentucky Auctioneers License Law, my father's name is on that bill as being one of the drafters of that auction law. And so the Kentucky Auctioneer Association has been something that's very special to me. I've had the opportunity to go through the chairs. I served as president. I've been inducted into the Kentucky Auctioneer Association Hall of Fame. And it's just been a part of my family. I'm going to be attending I'm 62. I'm going to be attending my 62nd Kentucky Auctioneers Convention starting tomorrow because I've been going. My parents took me when I was a baby. It was a family event. And we did the same thing with our kids. We took both of our kids with us whenever we went to the convention. My wife didn't stay at home with them. We went as a family. We made it a family event. And so by being there as a kid, I remember so much about some of the Kentucky auctioneer legends. Their chant whenever they competed in the not only bid calling contest, but in the fun auction and things like that. I remember so much about them and just a lot of remarkable things that I carry in my memory and fond association of the Kentucky Auctioneer Association.
Yeah, it's a great association made up of great people. I really, really cannot express how much I enjoyed being there a few years ago. Now, with the Kentucky Auctioneer Association, of course, this year, like every year, there will be an auction contest, a auctioneers contest. Every association seems to have that nowadays. Um, you have served as a judge for, I'm sure, numerous contests, and not least is the Mule Day contest that you judged at either last year or a few years ago, something like that. Now, I want to turn our attention to judging just for a minute because a lot of our listeners are competitive auctioneers and they are looking to improve how they compete. So just tell us real quick as a judge, when someone steps on that stage or in that box and they have the microphone in their hand, what is it that you're looking for that separates the champion from the rest?
Well, and what I look at is probably something different than the next judge will look at. Um, I'm not I'm not a contest auctioneer. I'm a working auctioneer. And I think there's two different groups of auctioneers. I think there's auctioneers that want to win a contest. And that's what their long life goal is. I wanted to win the World Tobacco Auctioneering Championship, and I did. But I didn't do anything different, basically, than I did every day that I was on sale. So I look for a contestant that I think is genuine, not somebody that has pampered and primped and prepared specifically just to be in that contest. I like an auctioneer that is the same the day he's behind that microphone in the contest as he would be the next day if he's on the microphone working for me. And that's what I look for. I look for somebody that is genuine. Bid calling's a big part of that too. How they're rules and how smooth they are as far as, all the other things that go along with that.
Yeah, I think that's perfect. I tell people when I'm coaching them for contests, you guys do this for a living. Get up there, get behind the microphone, maybe add some professionalism if that needs to be added. You don't want to get up there and be sloppy, but there's a great quote. There's a Southern author named Flannery O'Connor. She lived in the 50s, and Flannery O'Connor was she was a Southern belle. She just kind of had a Southern way of thinking about things, and she had this young man telling her, "Hey, I got accepted to go to college in Rome, Georgia," and she said, "Well, just remember, when in Rome, do as you done in Milledgeville," which is where she was from. And I
Yeah.
think that is
Right.
that's
Right.
a good mentality to have for auction contests. When on stage, do as you done at the local estate sale or at the cattle sale barn or at the tobacco warehouse for your purposes. You don't have to add any of the bells and whistles. As long as you're professional, as long as you are putting your best self forward, then how you do that is up to you.
Right. Right. There's a lot of truth to that. And, you can be selling something, and say, well, come on one more time,
Sure.
that you wouldn't do on every item that you were selling out here on another sale. A little something extra like that. But I look for somebody that is genuine in what they do. I have a problem with opening statements, those being rehearsed. You can tell when they've been rehearsed, and they're not speaking naturally about doing those. I've been judges in a lot of speaking contests, participating, and you can tell when somebody is being a genuine speaker and not rehearsed.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, let's turn our attention to the two things that Kentucky is perhaps most known for. One is bourbon whiskey, and the other is tobacco. Now, I have no interest in talking about bourbon whiskey necessarily, but I'm very interested in talking to you about tobacco and the tobacco industry. Now, obviously, years ago, the tobacco industry took a really hard hit and has since dwindled, we might say. And obviously, tobacco is not sold at live auction in warehouses like it was. It's, I guess, private traded now. And you may speak more to that. But tell us about how that kind of came about in your life as you were working in these tobacco warehouses and having these producers bring their crop in, and what a day in the tobacco sale looked like.
Yeah, and tobacco was king. When I was a kid and a teenager, and even early in my auctioneering career, tobacco was king, and tobacco was responsible for some type of revenue in one out of every 5 jobs that was in the state of Kentucky. I mean, it was a big thing, just like it was in the Carolinas and some other places. And so I grew up around tobacco. Tobacco being sold is different in Kentucky than it is in the Carolinas. It's a different type of tobacco. The marketing process is a little bit different. And, this week here in Kentucky, it's been zero just about every day. We've hustled a day or two to make it into the teens. And you go into a tobacco warehouse, most of those warehouses, old warehouses especially, had wood floors in them. A lot of them had a creek it run underneath. So if you think 15 or 10 degrees is cold outside, go in one of those warehouses and stand on the wood floor all day long with a creek running underneath, and you'll really know what cold is. The same is also true. I'd go to the Carolinas and sell tobacco starting the middle of July and sell to the first part of October. And it would be 115 degrees in those warehouses. Every door sitting open, you just pray that every once in a while there'd be a breath of air that would flash through that you might feel. I'd go into a warehouse at 8:15 of a morning. Sales would start there at 8:30. By 8:35, I didn't have a dry thread on. And a lot of times at lunch, I've gone back to a motel room and changed clothes so that I'd have something dry on that afternoon. And so, the process here was the farmer would bring his crop in most of the time in Kentucky, Tennessee, and the Burley Belt. They were bringing their entire crop in. It would be put on baskets, or in later, it was in the bales. It would be lined up according to grades. And when I say grades, I'm referring to stalk position, the position that it came off the stalk. Bottom leaves would be considered trash. Middle leaves would be considered lugs or leaf. Very top leaves would be considered tips. Tips were more desirable. The nicotine level was higher in the tips than it was in the trash, so to speak. And so it sold in that particular order. So when you sold a farmer's crop, you were selling his entire crop at one time. That was his one and only payday. And so, there's pressure on you to do what you can do. Carolinas was a little bit different. Still, tobacco was sold by the stalk position, but it was harvested in the field in those stalk positions and cured. So when you were selling bottom stalk tobacco, or down there it was called primings, if you were selling primings, that's what you sold all day long. And you might sell primings for 50 different farmers that day. And when you moved on up the stalk and was selling leaf, you would be doing the same thing. And so it was a little bit different. And a farmer didn't sell his entire crop at one time. Average farmer here around me in the area where I'm at that was raising tobacco was probably raising 10 to 15 acres tobacco. You would have a few people that would be raising 30 or 40 acres tobacco. The Carolinas, in the particular area where I was at selling tobacco, the average tobacco producer there was raising 200 acres or more. We had one or two customers that sold tobacco on the market where I was at that had 400 or 500 acres. And that's a lot of tobacco. And so, but you were selling, just like selling a livestock market, you were selling a farmer's yearly income. And that's why in our auction business here, somebody asked me the other day, what's the best time to have an auction sale? Well, my answer now is when you get ready. My answer 40 years ago was we didn't sell any farms until the fall of the year. You sold those when the tobacco markets were going to be opening up and there was going to be some money that was going to be circulating. You sold farms in the fall. You sold them in the spring. You tried to time a lot of your house auctions around the spring and on from that. And so, it played an important role as to what you did on some other things too.
Yeah. So my knowledge of tobacco, of course, we don't grow a whole lot of tobacco here in Middle Tennessee, but it's very limited. My understanding is that there are obviously different kinds of tobacco that grow better in different parts of the world. You have your Oriental leaf, your Latakia, your what else? Burley, Virginia, things like that, and they all come together. And typically, in your smoking tobacco, you're going to have blends. And so, when you, as an auctioneer, are selling these pallets of tobacco that I suppose have been graded or sorted at that point, is that correct?
Yeah. So, all right. So, look on the different types of tobacco in the United States or in this area. Mm-hmm. So you had dark air cured and dark fired tobacco. One of those was used for cigars primarily. The other was used in snuff and chewing tobacco. So then for cigarettes, you had burley and flue cured. Burley tobacco was grown in the 8-state Burley Belt, which included part of Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee, a little bit in Missouri, Ohio, and I don't know what other state I'm leaving out, but there was 8 states in the Burley Belt. And you also had flue cured. Flue cured was grown in Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. Flue cured gave tobacco the burning ability. Burley tobacco gave it the nicotine and the taste. And those two blended together, however the companies blended that, is what created a typical cigarette. So that was the different types. So you wasn't selling different types at the same time. So if we were selling, whether it was in South Carolina when I was selling tobacco, or whether it was in Shelbyville, Kentucky when I was selling tobacco, a farmer brought his tobacco in on sale day, government graders, and they were government graders. There was a price support that was on tobacco. It was not government backed. The price support was backed by the farmer. There was so much that was taken out of his check that operated that co-op. So there was no government tax dollars that was going into the production of tobacco or the support of tobacco. It was the farmer's money, but that was operated under USDA. So a USDA government grader would look at each pile of tobacco, and on the sale ticket, which might be about the size of my cell phone here, he would put that grade on there. And he did that grade by stalk position, color and texture of the leaf, and, and the quality of the leaf. So if you had a leaf that was hail damaged and was full of holes, of course, that was going to get a 5 instead of a 3. If you had a leaf that was smooth and straight, like a lug might be a B1F. The B was stood for the stalk position. It was a lug. The 1 was the number 1 quality, and the F was the color. And believe it or not, F stood for tan. And so that was the grade that was put on that, and that carried a price support, say $1.89. So when we were selling, that pile of tobacco had to bring more than $1.89. $1.89 was the price support, and if it didn't bring more than that, then the co-op or the pool bought that pile of tobacco with the farmer's paid money that was paid in. They paid the farmer for that, and they stored that until such time as they could sell that. And we had, like, 1983 was a drought year here in my area. Basically 100% of that crop went to the government pool. That stuff sat in storage for probably 10 years before tobacco companies needed some tobacco to blend with some other things. And they said, well, we probably could use some of that sorry crop. And then they bought some of that and moved it out.
Yeah. Okay. So the process then, when you're doing this, you mentioned your buyers, your companies that would come. Several of them we're probably familiar with because we've listened to certain videos of yourself and Sandy Houston and other tobacco auctions on YouTube, and we hear you call out something like RJR or Run John Run or American or something like that. Tell us who might be in the buying audience and what some of their names and code names were as you're calling the bids.
Well, all right. So, the typical ones are, you had American Tobacco Company, RJ Reynolds, Philip Morris. Philip Morris never actually had their own direct buyer. They did all of their purchases through dealers. We had AC Monk was a dealer. Dibble Brothers was a dealer. Austin, Carolina was a dealer. A lot of those companies were dealers, and they had not only orders for, say, Philip Morris, but they might have orders for Japan tobacco. They might have orders for China, Germany, Taiwan. All of those were big purchasers of tobacco. So a lot of those dealers had orders for the same people. J.P. Taylor in the Flu Cured, which was also Southwestern in the Burley, was a dealer that primarily bought Philip Morris's tobacco. Some special blends of tobacco that Philip Morris wanted. They might farm that out and give that order to 4 or 5 dealers. Miller, Miller, I can't think what, AC Monk, I think I mentioned those. So as an auctioneer, when we were selling, we did a few things to add in, help your chain flow just a little bit, to add a little bit of enthusiasm in the chain, some things like that. So I might be selling along, and RJ Reynolds buys a pile of tobacco, and I might knock it Reynolds. $1.80, dollar bid, $81, $81 Reynolds. And I might also do $81, bid, $81 Run John, and $81, $1 bid, $1 bid, walk a mile for a pack of Camel cigarettes. All 3 of those refer to RJ Reynolds. The buyer that was buying for Philip Morris, a lot of times if we were in parts of the Carolinas, we would knock at Virginia or Jenny. The buyer for them that I followed with the most in the Burley market, I knocked his tobacco Cowboy. Just that part. Export Leaf was a dealer. They bought for Brown and Williamson Tobacco Company. We knock at Exie, Dibble Brothers. We knock at Dibble, Monkey sometimes. Just different things to kind of add just a little bit of character in with the chain and to make it kind of flow together.
Okay, so let's take that and transition that then to the World Tobacco Auctioneering Contest. Because when we watch these videos of you or Sandy Houston or anybody else who's on YouTube, you hear those things going. You have the setup on the stage, and you're walking down the line, and you sell something for, let's say, $1.80, and then you say Run John or whatever. As a judge for that contest, what is it that a judge for a tobacco auction contest was looking for, and how does that similar and different to what we might think of in a common bid calling contest today?
Same things that you would on other contests. Now, The World Tobacco Auctioneering Championship was a true auctioneers contest. And it was a mock auction, of course. We sold the same piles of tobacco over and over. Here's the thing. The third pile of tobacco for me, if it was to bring $1.80 for me, it was to bring $1.80 for every contestant in the contest. And the same buyer was to buy it for every contestant in the contest. And so the judges also had to go by. So there were certain things in the tobacco field that was a little bit different. So let's say that you're selling tobacco along and it's bringing $1.70, and a buyer jumps a pile of tobacco to $1.80. And so he automatically gets that one. And let's say everybody else comes $1.80 on the next one, and he's still holding $1.80. He's entitled to that one also. That's called a takeout. And so all of those things were rolled into that contest. Every trick, every gimmick that there was ever been in the book for a tobacco auctioneer was all put in that contest. Pile of tobacco, they drop back and then run you back to the top, or they say, "Woo, I missed this pile of tobacco. How did you handle that?" All of it, everything happened the same for each contestant. And so if we're selling along, they had, we couldn't see them, but they had tags on their side of the row as to where that pile of tobacco was supposed to start at, what buyer was supposed to buy that pile of tobacco, and what it was supposed to bring. The judges also had a sheet. And some of those videos, if you watch, you see the judges looking down at their sheet down there, and they're following it just, and behind the ticket marker, they also had another judge that was following that to be sure that there was no mess ups nowhere. And if there was, he signaled to the judges that there were, and that was a discount. The other things were the same. Chank, your ability to catch bids, how you carried the sale along. Would you hire this auctioneer to work for you if you own a tobacco warehouse? All of those things came into play, just the same as it does for the World Livestock Auctioneering Contest, and just the same as it does for any other auctioneering contest. The only thing different is we sold the same thing, and it all brought the same money for the same contestant, for each contestant. And that's what made it so tricky to be able to win that. You had to be on your A game in order to win.
Yeah, one of the most interesting things about watching those videos is when I think it was the end of the first row, one of the buyers said, "I miss this pile of tobacco," and you have to figure out how to handle that. Now,
right
where I'm at, of course, I'm not a tobacco auctioneer. We'll never have the chance to be one, I'm sure. But if I'm selling, let's say, a farm equipment sale, and I'm selling a tractor, and that tractor sells for $13,000, and we move on to the next lot, and somebody comes up and says, "I missed that tractor." Well, it's gone. We've said sold, it's gone. That's your fault. But now in the tobacco world, your job and of course it would be for ours too, but I think it's a little bit different in the tobacco world because you have professional buyers there who come with a set amount of money, and you're trying to do the best you can. And so it seems that the way, for example, to bring up old memories, the way that you handled it, and I think the way probably everybody handled it in that contest, was you just ask. You ask the winning bidder, "Would it be all right if we open this back up and got a little money for our farmers?" So speak to that a little bit. How do you handle that in not only in a contest, but does that ever happen, or did it ever happen in the warehouse?
Oh, it happened basically every day somewhere or another. Because I mean, we were selling tobacco so fast. We sold a pile of tobacco every 3 to 6 seconds, and so you're moving at a snap just like that. And so if you've got 13 buyers in line, so you remember that the middle of that buyer's row, buyer number 5 would be directly across from the auctioneer wherever he's at. So that buyer number 13 in that line, there's 7 or 8 people in front of him before that pile of tobacco sold, before he ever gets there to it. And so that's where it happened every day. Somebody say, "Hey, I missed this." The key thing is my job as an auctioneer, I was working directly through a tobacco warehouse, but I was an employee of the farmer. So my job was to get this money for the farmer. And as I said a while ago, we were selling a farmer's yearly income. And so that was in Kentucky, that's what he had Christmas on. That's what he made his farm payment with. And that's what they planned to live on for the next year until they had another crop of tobacco to sell. And so it was up to me. You wanted to get the farmer the most money, and that's who I was working for. So yes, it happened every day. From the standpoint, we sold tobacco so fast, And you had to because of the fact that you had to sell so much on a daily time. I quit selling tobacco. I went to the fluke year the last year in 2000. In 2000, I was selling over $1 million, a million two of tobacco every day. And, I sell 4,000 piles of tobacco at times in a day's time. And, 6 hours of that. And so it was easy for a buyer to miss. All he had to do was glance off, be off one pile whenever he was looking down. I had some tobacco warehousemen that I worked for. They wasn't never sure which one we were selling for sure. And sometimes you had to correct them. No, we're selling this one. And it was easy to do, and it happened every day.
So you stopped selling tobacco, I guess you said in the year 2000, somewhere along those lines. When did tobacco auctions stop being a thing, I guess, is the best way to put it?
Basically, about that time. And 2000 was the last year we had a market in the fluke year. After that, tobacco was going primarily to contract. There was a few tobacco auctions that were left in the fluke year for 2001. I even tried to work out a deal to go back to the area where I had been going to, but they were unsure as to what they were going to have on an open auction market because contracts were doing so much. And it basically come down, they couldn't afford me. I couldn't go and leave Campbellsville, Kentucky and go to Mullins, South Carolina and live in a motel room and travel back and forth on Thursday nights and Sunday mornings for chump change. And I wasn't fixing to do it. And so 2000 was the last fluke year tobacco I sold. The last burley market was 2001, which finished up. I sold the last tobacco crop. I said 2001, it's been 2002 because I sold the last burley crop very early in 2003, finished up in January or something. And that was the last of the burley auctions as we know it. Now, there's been a few. There's still a sale, 2 or 3 different places in the Carolinas. There's 1 or 2 in Kentucky that is tobacco that has been basically rejected from the contract status it was contracted. And they have buyers come in and buy that. It's not a big deal. And, I wouldn't start my career on trying to be a tobacco auctioneer now based on, what happened. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's a shame. It really is. Did you and your family ever grow tobacco?
we did. Our farm raised tobacco. I grew up one of my earliest, my brother is 20 years older than I am. And somebody asked him one day at lunch, I walked in where he was at, and somebody asked him if he was working. And I said, well, he hadn't worked since I turned 9 years old. He quit then. My first job was they presented me with a gooseneck hoe and took me to the tobacco patch and told me to chop weeds out of tobacco. And I started work at 7 o'clock in the morning, and my dad would come pick me back up about 7 o'clock at night. And I got paid at the end of the day. I worked Monday through Friday and half a day on Saturday, and I got $6 come Saturday afternoon. And so I was making money hand over fist then. But that was my first job. So, yes, we raised tobacco, and I've been involved in all processes of it. So,
yeah. Yeah. It's like Eddie Abel says, it's a 13-month out of the year job.
yeah, about right.
Well, let me ask you a couple more things about this. I know that you've done auctions of all kinds other than tobacco, but tobacco is sort of a museum piece now. It's one that our listeners, and myself included, don't have a whole lot of knowledge in. So the tobacco chant is so different to most of what we know as the auction chant because you're not asking for anything. You're only calling what you have, and that's signified by different hand signals. So if you would, John, take just a minute, explain that a little bit, and then talk about some of those hand signals and how to read and interpret that.
Okay, so you were dealing with professional buyers from one end to the other. I think the most buyers that I ever had on a sale was 13. Most of the time it was around 9, 10, but I had a few markets that I had as many as 13 buyers on the market. It's hard to feed 13 dogs on 5 bones. Somebody's going to get hungry before it's all over with. But it all was hand signal. So tobacco sale day run like this. On one side of that row was the warehouseman, which represented the farmer. And his job on every pile of tobacco, he would see the ticket that the government had put on there. But he did in his mind an appraisal of what he thought that pile of tobacco was worth. And he would start the auctioneer at, say, $1.90. Well, then the next person in that line was the auctioneer, and the auctioneer would pick up his chain at $1.90. And depending on what the buyers bid, he'd either go up or sometimes he would come back down for somebody to catch him. Behind the auctioneer was usually another representative of the warehouse. Every warehouse in the South run a leaf account. They would buy some cheap tobacco, refurbish it, so to speak, and resell it again another day. And then behind him would be a ticket hander, which would pick that ticket up and hand that to a ticket marker. And the ticket marker then would record what that pile of tobacco brought and who bought it. So let's say that pile of tobacco brought $1.85. The ticket marker is writing $1.85 on that ticket. And let's say RJ Reynolds bought it. Their symbol on tobacco markets would have been an R. So he puts an R on there for them. And then after the auctioneer has already sold that pile of tobacco and is selling on the next one, then that buyer will grade that pile of tobacco for his company grade. And he might say 44X. And so that ticket marker is putting that on there. So a ticket marker was always at least one pile behind the auctioneer on a slow sale. On a fast sale, he might be as many as 3 piles behind. And a good top-notch ticket marker could keep 3 piles in his mind, price, buyer, and grade as we went along. Didn't make any difference if it's 14 below zero or 120 degrees in the warehouse. That was a good ticket marker. That was also another thing that the auctioneer had to work to. It's just like any other auction. Don't make any difference how high you sell it if you don't get it recorded. I use the word sometimes the scribe. It don't make any difference what you did if the scribe don't get it down. You make the decree, but if the scribe don't record it, it won't be there for historical purposes. So then on the other side of that road was the buyers. And as I said a minute ago, usually the buyers drew their position where they were at in that line by what that company had done on that particular market in years past. So let's say that Philip Morris was the largest buyer of leaf, which they were. And so the primary dealer that was buying for them usually was a Universal Leaf and their representative, whether it be J.P. Taylor or Virginia Tobacco Company. They had the first pick of the position that they wanted. And so they always took the position straight across from the auctioneer. So wherever the auctioneer was at, they took that position. Then the next largest buyer had the next position, and he might either go in front of him or directly behind him. Third position, do the other. And that's how the positions for buying positions were determined in the line. Of course, the primary place was to be direct across from that auctioneer. So as an auctioneer, when I was selling, when I came up to that pile of tobacco, as my chance started, I wanted kind of my foot maybe coming against that pile of tobacco. And when I sold that pile of tobacco, I should be past it and my left foot at the next one because you're going straight from one to the next. And so I was already past that pile usually whenever I knocked or sold that pile of tobacco. We use the term knock. Whenever I knocked that pile of tobacco, I was already past the one that I was selling. When I started, I was just coming up to it. And so as an auctioneer, I always looked down at that pile of tobacco. I always took a glance as I was coming to it. I'm hearing what the starter is starting that pile for. I may think he's lost all of his mind and he's crazy. And by me seeing what I see determines how fast I might drop back if I have to for a buyer to catch me. It also might determine if we've been selling tobacco, say for $2.05, and all of a sudden he starts one at $1.90 right in the middle of the deal, and it's as good as the ones we were selling for $2.05. Forget about his $1.90. I'm going to go to something else. I mean, I had that prerogative to do that. And so I'm watching that too, watching 13 buyers, keep an eye on your ticket marker. If somebody stumbles, the whole train derails. And so that's what you got to. I had to watch.
Yeah, tell us about the hand signals for the buyers, their price markers. So 1, 2, then below and all that.
And so if we were selling along, let's say the starter started a pile of tobacco at $1.90. And so if a buyer wanted to bid $1.90, he would hold his fist up like this. Well, this would be 91, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, $2. Same way coming back down. Started at $1.90, $1.89, 88, 87, 86, 85, 84, 83, 82, 81, 80. And if he was way off and he double pumped it, he's dropping back to 70. So you're watching that. Most of the time, like I said, a lot of these dealers They may have an order, say, for a Japanese tobacco company, and they had the same money on that order. So it was $1.85. Tobacco auctions was something that you had tie bids on 90% of the time. There was always, of that 13 buyers, you might have all 13 of them bidding the same money. And you might have 8 of the 13 that was bidding the same money. And a lot of it was because they had the same order for the same. And their instructions were, you follow so and so. So if so and so company gives $1.81 for that same grade, you go with him and you give $1.81. So if you were selling along and you had a buyer that just took it on his own and he broke the market and went $1.81 on one pile right in the middle, everybody else is fixing to come with him. It has that same order. They're watching and listening for that grade, and they know that Standard's grade, whatever it might be, was the same thing as Philip Morris's grade for something else. So if one broke it, you went on. But it was the only type of auction that you would have that you had so many tie bids on. And then it's the auctioneer's job to determine who gets that. Sometimes it was first one there. Sometimes it wasn't. If you had 13 buyers that we walk in the warehouse this morning and the first pile of tobacco, they start off at $1.90 and 13 people standing there holding $1.90. What are you fixing to do? You don't give an even ante because that's not fair. I had a buyer give me a cussing one time, told me he was going to whip me in Conway, South Carolina, and I invited him to come on across the road, but he didn't come. But he was mad because he didn't get one out of a crop. I had 12 buyers in line. There was like 10 piles of this leaf. It was just coming in on the floor, and he didn't get one of them. And he had supervisor in the warehouse, and he was mad. I mean, he was mad, but he hadn't bid on a pile of tobacco all day long. He was the most disinterested person that you had ever seen, and he wasn't entitled to one of them. And I had a man standing straight across from me that had bid on 90% of the tobacco that we had sold that day. So who do you take care of? And so, that came down. That was the auctioneer's job too.
Yeah. Wow. That was my next question, was how do you differentiate between tie bids? But you answered that great. Okay, John, we're kind of nearing the end of our time together in this podcast, and I've really enjoyed this. I want to turn our attention, though, to the way I end every single podcast, and that is with some rapid fire questions. You can talk as long as you want to, but they're 1-2 word, 1-2 sentence answers here. And this will encompass more of your general auction background than just the tobacco auctions. So, John, in your whole life as a bid caller, what's the weirdest item that you've ever sold at auction?
That would be a hard question to answer. I've sold P-fowls and guineas. My dad and I had a divorce sale one time, and we thought we were done with everything, and the woman fit because there was some guineas running around in the yard and we hadn't sold them. So we sold those for the buyer to catch them. So I guess that would be one of them that would be right there that was kind of weird and strange.
Yeah. What's your favorite filler word?
My filler words are real simple. I use dollar bid and now, and occasionally I might throw something else in, but my chain's pretty simple. I don't use a lot of filler words. I specify on the numbers.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you all do online auctions?
We do. We did some online auctions prior to COVID on some real estate. And basically, since COVID, most of what we have done online has been personal property. We also do some simulcast on some of our real estate auctions now. We did 2 simulcast auctions this last year on farm equipment, and had one that had some antique cars in it. And so we're kind of combining the two together. We're kind of working simulcast in with all of our live auctions, somewhat on larger ticket items.
What to you makes contests valuable?
You get to see where you stand at as a bid caller against somebody else. I think anytime in any type of business or whatever, church or whatever it is, the relationships that you establish help you in life and in the future. And contests are that way. You establish relationships with other contestants. You get to meet sometimes the judges that are maybe from a different part of the country than you are from, and you can always pick up something from them. And you can always pick up the telephone and call them and ask them something too. You have a network there that you can do. So I think contests are beneficial from a standpoint that they help you see who you are and help you get to where you want to go.
Who are some auctioneers that you really love to listen to?
Well, my father was the best auctioneer I think I ever heard. And I always say, of course, my father died in 2003, and he was an auctioneer for 65 years before he died. And I always said if I could be half of the bid caller that he was, I would be a good bid caller. And I've got tapes and some CDs that we made after he died of some tapes, him selling livestock and also tobacco. But my dad was a super bid caller. He had a rapid fire. My chain is real similar to his. He had a rapid fire chain, didn't use a lot of filler words, and he could sell snowballs to Eskimos.
What's one piece of advice you would give a novice auctioneer?
Be patient. It takes time. This is not a business that you can roll into the first week and you are the big gun. It takes time. It's like everything else, you have to pay your dues. A doctor that just graduated from medical school is not going to be the best heart surgeon that there is in the operating room. But after he has done that for a while and developed techniques and learned from others that he has had, he could be well on his way to being the best surgeon that there would be in that operating room.
Yeah. Now, I know you get asked this all the time, just about every time somebody talks to you, they ask you this, but I'm going to ask you too. Would you mind concluding our podcast by selling us a pile of tobacco, giving us a demonstration of that chant?
That'd be fine. And I thought about this morning when I knew we was going to talk this afternoon. You know, I sell a lot of things. I've sold a lot of other stuff besides tobacco. I guess I will always be known as tobacco auctioneer. The fact that I won that contest. You ask about the valuability of contest. That contest, winning that, I had just landed the year that before probably one of the biggest tobacco auctioneering jobs that there was in the business. And that contest kind of helped me renegotiate my contracts where I was at. And it really was beneficial from that standpoint. But yes, tobacco auction sounded like this: $81 bill, $81 $1 bit of Ron John, $1 bit of $85, $5 bit of $7 bit, $90 bit, $90 American, $95 bit, $95, $2 bit, $1.25 bit, $2.5 bit, $2.5 liquid, and $2.5, $10 bit, $2.10, $10, $2.10, $10 bit RJ, and $2.10, $10 bit Jenny, $2.10, $10 bit, $10 bit American, and $2.10 bit now $5, $2 bit, $95, $90 bit now $90 bit export, and $90 bit, $90 bit American, and $90 bit now $90 bit.
I love it. I love it. It's a tradition of times gone by, unfortunately, but I'm so thankful that we still have people who are there and who've made a career out of it and who are passionate about talking about these things. I hate the idea of tradition going by the wayside. I love that we have people who are still proud of the tradition of bid calling in whatever way that it comes: livestock, tobacco, cars, estate, personal property, equipment. I don't care. We want to preserve the tradition.
If I had known that tobacco was going to go out, I'd have a lot of videos of me selling on sale somewhere. I have a lot of videos from that World Tobacco Auctioneering contest in different years, but I don't have a lot of videos of on an actual sale somewhere or another. But I never dreamed that tobacco would go out, but it did.
Yeah, yeah. Well, John, I've really appreciated this. I think our listeners are going to enjoy it, and you're a wealth of information and knowledge and wisdom, and I'm very, very thankful to get to call you friend. So if there's ever anything I can do for you, just holler. And with that, everyone, we will end this podcast, and Lord willing, we'll see you next month. Thank you so much. You've been listening to the Better Bid Calling podcast. If you would like to sponsor an episode, please contact us at betterbidcalling@gmail.com.